Well, maybe why don't we start with introducing the City of Portland team. I'll start. So my name's Art Pierce. I'm the Director of Policy, Planning, and Projects, really looking at connecting policy direction with capital improvements and people-based programs to help shift the city. Wendy?
I'm Wendy Colley. I'm the city traffic engineer, and my teams are responsible for designing bike and pedestrian improvements, maintaining operations, and even construction, traffic control, traffic control for bikes and peds through construction zones.
Good morning and Happy New Year. My name is Denver Igarda, and I am one of the managers on the planning team. The team that I manage is the Complete Streets team. So that includes all of our modal coordinators, so our bike coordinator, ped coordinator, ADA coordinator, transit coordinator, and freight coordinator. Those are all folks that are on my team.
That's great. And maybe David, if you want to introduce yourself, and then we can go to Rick, Jeff, and Martin.
Sure. David Wessel. I'm the planning manager for Metro Plan, the MPO here in Flagstaff. And all of those positions that Denver just mentioned, that's me for Metro Plan. So good morning. Glad to meet you.
You wanted me to go ahead next, Adam? All right, thanks. Good morning, all. I'm Rick Barrett. I'm the city engineer here in Flagstaff. What that means in Flagstaff is I oversee the city transportation network and the traffic engineer. I'm also responsible for the city's capital improvements program, which in sum total in any given year is about $18 million. I oversee development review for the city of Flagstaff, and then finally inspection and testing of the right-of-way, any permitted work in the right-of-way. And thank you for spending some time with us today.
Thank you, Rick. Jeff, do you want to go next?
Sure. Good morning, Jeff Bowman. I'm the traffic engineer for Flagstaff. Sounds like Wendy and I do about the same thing, so I'll go quick like Dave. But thanks for being here with us today. We're interested to hear what you have to tell us.
Great.
Martin, last but not least.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. I'm Martin Entz. I'm the multimodal transportation planner for the city. So all things ped and bike, and we also have an urban trail system, which the planning of which I manage. And I would describe to you who is on my team, but I just did.
Yes, so that's our group, and yeah, Wendy, Denver, and Art, thank you again for taking the time to meet with us in your busy schedules. We really appreciate it, and I especially appreciate your time today. But yeah, Art, I guess Art has a little bit of a presentation for us, and then we can dive into discussion afterwards.
Yeah, and so we sort of divide this into three parts. I'm going to sort of preamble a little bit. Denver has a presentation of some slides he'll share, and then Wendy has some slides as well. So I guess, the sort of the preamble that is the thread you'll see in the presentations is, the exercise we're undertaking in terms of shifting how cities work is both physical and cultural, and it's a process of change management. And we think about change management a lot for organizations, but we don't necessarily think about those steps as sort of specifically for cities. And so I think I just would encourage us to think about the process, the work that we do as change management and change managers. And so a first step is setting the direction of where you're going, getting clear direction and authorization from council and from the mayor, then being more specific of taking that broad direction and turning it into more refined understandings of what the moves are, refining the tools, and then going a step further into the implementation of those. And I think a lot of cities visit Portland and then try to immediately implement a tool on a street without having proceeded through those very specific steps, and find themselves in turmoil and backlash with people saying, why the hell are you doing this? And it's because they never established the full context of the importance of valuing the right-of-way and understanding the right-of-way as a sort of a constrained and limited resource that needs to be used really effectively. All of those things then get you to that design solution. But I think if you just go to the design solution and say, because it's best for everybody, you're not going to get there. So anyways, that's my sort of high level preamble and sort of a philosophy I think that we're trying to bring here And then I think I'll pass it to Denver. Denver's going to go through some high-level pieces. I may jump in here and there if there's other thoughts that occur to me. This is a slide deck that both Denver and I have used over the years, so we have slightly different approaches to it. But.
Thanks, Art. So I'm hoping everybody can see the slideshow. Is that showing up?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Now I just closed it.
Not anymore.
Let me try that one more time. Glad it works though. I closed it because I thought I was unmuting myself and I was actually unsharing. Good morning again. And yeah, this actually, this borrows heavily from Art's slide deck. So Art, feel free to jump in at any moment. There's quite a bit here, and I think I'll be skipping through a number of slides, primarily like if you see something that I go by too quickly, stop me, or we can come back to it and we can spend a little bit more time if you have specific questions. Art, yeah, jump in whenever you feel. Let's see if I can. All right, so I'm going to skip this one first off because this is actually Art's group, and at some point, if few questions come up about how we're organized with our capital program or planning, I can kind of jump into those. We can go back to that slide and show some of the org chart and under Art. But this slide I love to show, like first off, we've had a lot of obviously exchanges with other cities, both nationally and internationally, and I think a lot of times the question comes up like, how come Portland's different, or why is there interest in Portland? We've, pre-pandemic, we had a lot of people coming to visit, and we'd go and visit folks. And I think part of Portland's story is just like this slide of how we've managed to get a more balanced, multimodal kind of commute share, and have one of the highest kind of bike, walk, transit mode shares in the country. And this slide is showing kind of in green kind of the Portland mode split for commute trips in comparison to the national average. So I think the one I actually like to highlight the most is the drive alone. You can see like, the numbers show us having a significantly lower drive alone trip. So, basically a 20% difference between the national average. Those trips get distributed across the other modes, and particularly like the bicycle transit shares are quite unique within the country. So this is a big part of why Portland has kind of created kind of a name for ourselves in terms of multimodal transportation. And this graph shows kind of that evolution over time. In the mid 90s is when we adopted our first bike and ped plans, and we've now updated both of them because we've basically have like a 20-year time horizon. But you can see in that time, we saw just continual growth in our multimodal trips, but we're still in American City. We still have kind of predominance of driving trips on our streets. And actually of late, we've had kind of a stagnation of our bike share, which is a lot of the conversations we're having today. Just to kind of go back to a little bit more historical, Portland is a typical American city in that we were very auto dominant not that long ago. And this is just an image of our downtown where we used to have a freeway kind of running right along the downtown waterfront. Now that's the park that's in the middle. And then I shared this slide that this is actually from a bike. Portland is a bike blog in Portland, and they took this photo at a ride just a couple days ago for New Year's. And this is a kind of a reconfigured NATO Parkway, which is the street that's just on the other side of the park. So we now have, in the place of a freeway, a park, and right next to it, we have this street with this massive multimodal kind of bike ped street design. So I'm going to go through these next few slides pretty quickly, but basically at PBOT, we're all about helping people in Portland get where they want to go and do it in a way that's sustainable and safe, but most of all, giving people options, allowing them to choose the trips that are best suited for them in that day. This is just an image of all of the things within PBOT that we manage. We have $13 billion worth of assets. thousands of miles of streets, hundreds of bridges. We have an aerial tram, we have dozen streetcars. So this is, all within the portfolio of our bureau. The transportation planning framework is super important to us. Way back in the 80s, we adopted the city's first comprehensive plan, which is basically a land use and transportation plan for growth. Like, how are we going to accommodate growth in the coming decades? And so we recently updated that plan. We call it the 2035 comprehensive plan in 2016, and that was followed by a full update to our transportation system plan in 2018. Some of the key policies that come out of that I'll cover in a minute, but the one I show at the very bottom is that we introduced kind of a prioritization of modes for moving people. We kept kind of our freight movement separate because we know that moving goods is different, but also super important to our goals. But you can see in that we're prioritizing kind of the vulnerable, more kind of climate friendly, sustainable modes, multimodal modes above vehicular modes, in particular single occupancy vehicles. So this framework really creates the foundation for us looking not just in the next few years, but decades down the road. And the moving to our future is PBOT's strategic plan. That's where we kind of translate those policies and goals into our 3-year strategy. Say a little bit more about that in a second. I wanted to show this slide because that comprehensive plan and transportation system plan is really about, we expect, until 2035, significant growth within Portland. If we continue at the status quo, a lot of those trips are going to be drive-alone trips that we will not be able to accommodate on our system. So we have to come up with creative ways to be more efficient about the space on our roadways. And that gets back to multimodal enhancements, gets back to other ways of both incentivizing and encouraging multiple modes of transportation. I'm going to skip this one. We can come back to it if you want. It's just around our strategy for how Portland's organized and our region's organized for growing in the future. So back to that 3-year strategic plan. The strategic plan in Portland, PBOT, is focused around 3 goal areas: safety, moving people and goods, and asset management. So we use those 3 goals kind of as the guiding force for our near-term actions and investments. And we also ask 2 really important questions of everything that we do here at PBOT. One is, will it advance equity and address structural racism? And will it reduce carbon emissions? So these are guiding principles for us that aren't just new, but things that we've had in place for a long time. Portland was one of the first cities to enact a local plan for cutting carbon emissions way back in '93. We've had decades of working towards this in coordination with all the bureaus across the city. And transportation plays a huge role because we're almost 40% of the emissions within our county being accounted for transportation of goods and people. So to the safety goal, we have a Vision Zero goal, which is to eliminate deaths and serious injuries on our streets. This is a huge challenge for us, and I think I'll not spend too much time on this because I know Wendy's going to talk a bit about our kind of approach to safety enhancements on our streets. But we do have a network of high crash corridors where we focus our prioritization and investments, transforming streets from kind of very auto-dominated to more multi-objective, people-oriented streets.
Hey, Denver.
Yeah, sure.
I appreciate this. I'm thinking of like a million questions, and I'm wondering if you mind. I'm going to try to hold most of them to myself to keep things moving along. But is it okay if I ask one question about the carbon neutrality and equity goals? And were those established in other documents?
Yeah, exactly. They are kind of foundational within that comprehensive plan. And the comprehensive plan, it's a transportation and land use plan, but it's actually for every bureau within the city. So those goals, the high level goals around, particularly around carbon emission reduction, climate, environmental goals, and around equity, anti-displacement, anti-racism, those things are all established within that broad, like long-range comprehensive plan. And then we work in our bureau to translate that into our own kind of guiding kind of actions and investments through our transportation system plan. So yeah, and when we're working with other bureaus, we're starting with equity, or we're starting with climate as kind of, this is how we, have a shared guiding light. And if we had another hour, we could talk about our form of government, which is pretty complicated and unique, since we have a commission form of government. And the goals and policies are key to us getting on the same page.
All right, thank you so much. I'll interrupt
Great.
now.
No, feel free to interrupt if you want, and I'm going to try and go through this a bit quicker. I'm not that far from the end, but I know we want to have more of a discussion too. So again, like, this is kind of walking through that kind of hierarchy I mentioned. Like, we start with, the most vulnerable, people walking as a priority mode for the city, especially where we have a lot of activity and density of land use. And we try and remind folks, everyone is, every trip starts as a pedestrian. And so being a pedestrian is core to how Portlanders get around. And we want to make sure that people of all abilities are able to use our system. We just adopted at council last year a update to our ADA transition plan. And our commissioner likes to, to remind, to say, whenever we're talking about that transition plan, that, like, we're all temporarily abled, like we all at any moment could be in the situation where we, need a mobility device to get around. So bicycling, it's kind of what Portland's known for. We have decades of experience. I think, we've, I think within the city, continue to invest in that network. We have probably the best bicycling conditions we've ever had. We've struggled a bit lately with kind of increasing our mode share, and a lot of that actually is attributed to rapid increase in our population. And a lot of people that are moving here, we're struggling to get them to, adopt biking off the bat. And I think some of that has to do with how easy it is to get around by car here. But we do have a long history of bicycling and a solid network across the city to provide for facilitation of almost every trip you could imagine in Portland. I'm going to skip through the next few pretty quickly because I know we're focused on ped and bike, but like obviously Portland is well known for transit. We had our light rail system. We've first kind of modern streetcar system, and transit use is relatively high, as I showed earlier. This is kind of the spine of our kind of mobility network to encourage people to kind of leave the keys and think of another way to get across town. We're updating our freight plan right now, which is on my team, and it's been exciting to kind of focus more on the last mile and urban deliveries. With the pandemic, we've seen this rapid increase in deliveries that people are getting at home, and we have a captive audience in terms of their understanding of how important that is to their daily lives. We don't know what's coming in the future, but we already know we have e-scooters and electric bikes and a number of other things that we need to both plan for and accommodate, and things that we don't yet know are coming, including autonomous vehicles and other modes. I'm not going to talk about this one, but we spent a lot of time during the pandemic re-emphasizing the broader use of our right-of-way for business use, primarily outdoor dining. And that's something that I will leave for another time so that Wendy has time to jump in. I don't know, Wendy, if you want to jump right in, or if you want to give a break for some questions, or you're muted, Wendy.
Thanks. Put myself on camera, but not off mic. Let's go ahead and take some questions for your presentation. And then maybe before I start mine, I'm really going to deal with the sort of the technical pieces of how we do our pedestrian crossings and our bike facilities, and what that looks like. So feel free to ask some questions, Denver.
Well, this is Dave, and I'll just kind of let you know what I'm interested in, and then maybe we can follow up afterwards. So I think one of our challenges, we're much lower density and much smaller city, obviously. And so when I saw the complete neighborhoods, like, boy, I really want to know about that, because I think that's really going to affect our ability to achieve mode shift and where we should focus some of our land use policies. So I'll follow up with you guys on that. Then, you know, I don't know if we coined this term, but we use it, we call it hypermobility. And this was just something that we discovered a while ago, where it's like, oh, look, we have not as high as Portland, but a higher average walk bike share. But then we started actually looking at like ITE rates, and noticed our household trip rate was just like the suburban average everywhere else. So we kind of felt like we actually had hypermobility, people making more trips and doing that through the other modes, but still using their cars every bit as much. So I'd like your perspective on that. And then just the economy versus mobility. You know, one of the arguments that we'd like to make and investigate is, hey, we think that pedestrian environments are actually more productive from an economic perspective. And whether or not you guys have done any research into that and might be able to help us pursue that. So I'll just leave those out there and follow up with the answers later. But thank you. This was really interesting.
Sounds great. And Art, unless you have a quick response, probably there's a lot of info to share from that question, those questions.
Right. I guess I think you're asking the right questions, I guess would be my quick reaction. So like, let's dig more deeply into those. I think we actually struggle with trip length as one of our issues, that even though we're a denser city, we still have longer than really would be ideal for biking and walking and transit trip lengths. We have people living in the nice old streetcar neighborhoods, but working for Intel across the river and in the suburbs. And so I think every city has that issue of destinations and origins being hard to link through a network. And so we've really focused in on those short trips as where we can be the most impactful. And so it's really thinking about how do we conserve transportation resources through focusing on those short trips. So even if you have more overall trips, you know, how do you really serve those short trips most effectively to leave space for those longer trips that are just we're never going to chase them all the way, right? Is my sort of one key thought out of that space. Yeah.
So Art, if I can ask, can you define for me what a short trip is in your world?
Yeah. So within the transportation system plan, we define trips for 1 mile or less. We're trying to drive towards walking, trips 3 miles or less towards cycling, and really trips 5 miles or less or so, trying to make transit competitive with driving. And at a certain trip length, we're producing options, but really it's going to be very hard for us to compete with driving. And we're really reliant on the state system and, you know, longer distance transit commute kind of tools to express bus and those kind of things for those longer trips that are just too hard to drive people towards those other modes.
Thanks.
Just for a sense of scale, in Flagstaff, a long bike commute is about 6 miles.
Right. Yeah, and certainly as historically daily cycling commuter before I just got locked into my house, at about 5 miles, you're starting to need to change clothes and all those things rather than being able to just wear what you were wearing for the day. You know, that seems to be the tipping point.
Yeah, and whether you have a shower at work. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, it just starts not to be possible. Yeah.
Art and team, I have a quick question. You know, Denver, in your comments about safety and looking at the walker first or the pedestrian first, I'm just wondering, something that I'm wrestling with a lot with our designs is the number of lanes at an intersection. Is there a certain cap that you kind of cap projects at in terms of how many lanes you expect a pedestrian to cross to ensure that Vision Zero value that you have?
This may actually be the perfect segue into
yes, the perfect segue. Yeah.
She quite literally is ready to answer that question with graphics.
Yeah, I'll get into that in my presentation. That's key. It's really key.
Yeah. Why don't we jump there, Wendy, and then we can always swing back around to some. Yeah.
Absolutely. My presentation up here. And do this. There we go. All right, so I've kind of pushed a few presentations together. I'll probably skip over some slides. Feel free to jump in at any time if you want more technical information on anything that I'm going through, because like I said, I kind of pushed a few things together, not sure where we were going to go this morning with the discussion. But in looking at how we create safe designs here at the City of Portland, as you just alluded to, Safe Streets focus on human design, and we start with pedestrian and bicyclists. And the design should be for the most vulnerable users. I believe, and PBOT believes, that streets should enhance the journey. So you're not just slogging away on your 5-mile bike commute, but there's other interesting things and things to look at, things to do along the way. From a safety standpoint, we'd really try to focus where the crashes are occurring along corridors and high crash intersections. And we use a lot of data to determine what types of crashes and what the best treatments are for those crashes. So we are a Vision Zero city. We have a Vision Zero program with the goal of eliminating all fatal and serious injury crashes citywide. And again, that hinges on making safety improvements for people walking and on bicycles. Our Vision Zero projects result in a reduction in the fatal and serious injury crashes, safer and more frequent pedestrian crossings, so pedestrians don't feel like they have to cross where there are not pedestrian enhancements because it's too far to go to the next enhanced crossing. We put in new or we enhance bike facilities. Actually, in addition to putting in new facilities, we're trying to convert some of our older bike projects that were just bike lanes when they started to protected bike facilities. And then our biggest goal is trying to reduce travel speeds, especially in the range where people are driving 10 or more over the posted speed. That's a really big focus for us in the coming years. And what we know is that street design definitely influences behavior for all modes of travel. So in the top left, you can see we had a 4-lane facility here. And after improvement, we made it clear which lane you need to be in if you're a car and you want to turn onto one of the side streets. Where are bikes, positioned best to cross the street, and how, where are pedestrians positioned best to cross the street? Since there's 4 legal crossings, and bikes are kind of going diagonally across the intersection, we really make it clear where people can be safely during design. And when you make things predictable, you make things safer. So if you can show everybody where they need to be, that creates predictability. We know that street design can exacerbate human mistakes, and that we all make mistakes at times, whether we're driving, walking, or bicycling. This is quite an old project, but probably one of our most successful ones that we did when we started our Vision Zero program. You can see, far off in the distance, there's a pedestrian crossing, but where the bus is stopped, you can see where the bus is stopped on the right side of the photo and the bus stop on the left side of the photo. Guess where pedestrians were crossing? They were crossing right there, back and forth between the bus stops. So not at this marked crosswalk. We had a 4-lane roadway with no place for pedestrians to stop in the middle should they have selected a gap that wasn't big enough for them to get all the way across the street. We had cars passing buses where they don't see the pedestrians crossing, cars changing lanes to avoid turning vehicles, bikes riding on this narrow sidewalk. And with all of that happening, the street was still posted at 35 miles an hour, even though it fronted 2 colleges, a major senior living center, and multi and single family housing. So what we did is we implemented a road diet on this street. And we know that when we have better street design, we protect people when mistakes and violations occur. So we moved the crosswalk to match the desired pedestrian path. We put in a pedestrian island to prevent autos from passing the bus. We added bike lanes to minimize conflicts with pedestrians on sidewalk. And then we created this turn lane so that drivers weren't, shifting lanes. And we reduced the posted speed to 30 miles per hour. And a little bit later, I'll show you the results of that study as far as safety goes and things that we learned from that. How do we design for people crossing busy streets? Our toughest designs are on these 5-lane arterials, which I think is what we were getting at when I started this this presentation. We have several high volume and high speed streets around the city, and most of them are on our high crash network. And so we're really focusing on how do we slow people down and how do we get pedestrians and bicycles safely across and along these streets.
Hey, Wendy.
Yeah.
I'm just a real quick thought, going back to a previous slide that you had about vulnerable users, and just to comment on that. I think we like to think of vulnerable users generally as pedestrians and bicyclists, but I think the reality is that we can have a more nuanced approach to that and think of vulnerable users as, for example, distracted pedestrians, for a variety of reasons, for children who don't have the skill and judgment or discretion fully developed yet, even like public intoxicants, which we have periodically in Flagstaff, are examples of vulnerable users. And I think the point is that we design our streets to not only protect them, but to kind of make up for their vulnerabilities. And we do that for vehicles, right? Like we design, engineering often includes safety buffers that are intended for the imprudent drivers, but we don't think of the same way with other vulnerable users, especially peds and bikes. And some of those situations or conditions that I described. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with you. And we focus a lot on elderly and younger users of the system. And just recently, we looked at all the fatal crashes that occurred in the city of Portland. This just came out yesterday or the day before. And a high number in this past year and in 2020 were houseless individuals. We have a pretty big problem or an issue with that here in the city of Portland. And it's translating into some of our fatal and most serious injury crashes. So yeah, I totally agree with you on that one. Yeah.
Yeah, I think another way to look at it is do we require pedestrians and bicyclists to be at their most alert all the time in order to be safe on our streets, or are our streets just by very nature, their intrinsic quality, safe for those kinds of users, so they don't have to be always heightened or be on their full game just to be safe.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. 100%. Yeah. And we'll get into, I don't know if I got into the protected bike facilities on this slide or on this presentation so much, but that's one of the reasons, we do that for bicyclists. We like a protected facility instead of just a bike lane next to a travel lane. And then the enhanced crossings, which I really get into in this presentation. So we'll get into that a little bit more. But when we started this effort to improve pedestrian crossings on our high cross network and really across the city, we created engineering guidelines that just sets the stage for where are we marking crosswalks, and then what type of crosswalk are we marking. So this is just very basic. It's on our website. I can send you links to that. But this is mostly what a lot of folks are interested in, is what are our engineering guidelines? Once we determine a crosswalk should be marked, what does it look like? If it's low speed and 2-lane, we're pretty comfortable usually doing a marked crosswalk. As the number of lanes increase and the volumes increase and the speeds increase, we want to go to the highest level, full signal or a half signal in some cases. So we put these engineering guidelines together based on NCHRP 562 report and the Zagir report. Both of those I can share with you if you're not familiar, but that's how we got to this. And we've been using this for many, many years now at the city of Portland. In fact, we just refined it with some extra guidance for one-way streets and some other things like that. So I'll just go through these. About all the types of treatments probably for pedestrians, but if you see something, give me a holler and I'll stop and provide a little bit more info. We do use RFBs, rapid flashing beacons, quite a bit here in the city of Portland, especially on our multi-lane facilities. And we do use a half signal. I don't know if the engineers in the group are interested in this, but the city of Portland and the city of Seattle have half signal guidelines. It's not something that's typically recommended in the MUTCD, but we are using it more often for pedestrian improvements on multi-lane facilities, because it's a treatment that we can use where we can coordinate for time of day traffic and bus priority and some other things like that. So we have guidelines for half signal implementation. We sometimes will go to a full signal if there are other elements of the roadway that, meet warrants for a full signal. And sometimes, on this next slide, I'll show you, we go for a full signal even if we don't meet MUTCD warrants. That's how serious we are about pedestrian safety. We don't feel like we need to meet the pedestrian volume warrants. We look at history of pedestrian crashes. We look at places where the left turn movement needs to be separated from the pedestrian movements. We're finding on most of our high crash corridors that is a significant problem where drivers are looking for gaps in traffic. They finally find a gap in opposing traffic and they miss that a pedestrian has started crossing the side street. So we implement full signals in that situation. And then again, for signal coordination for efficient traffic and transit flow, we'll put in full signals where pedestrian crossings are needed. And then one of our biggest treatments that I was getting at when I was talking about showing the slides about driver design is road reorganizations. We've done quite a few in the last 6 or 7 years. In about 2012, we looked at our system and noted how many 4-lane roadways we had in the city of Portland, 2 lanes in each direction, which didn't allow for any sort of median islands, pedestrian amenities, and really long crossing distances for pedestrians. And at that time, we identified a whole slew of roads that we wanted to convert to 3-lane facilities. So we went through and we implemented quite a few of those projects. And then we actually then started looking at our 5-lane facilities and saying, how many of these can we take to 3 lanes? And I'll share some data that we have about that process here. But before I do that, I'll get into designing for people on bikes. Again, where do we find the space for bike lanes? And we do that by prioritizing pedestrians, bikes, and transit over auto movement. So again, when we're talking about, where are we finding the space, we'll take it away from auto users often in order to create a better system for bikes and pedestrians. In the 1990s, as Denver mentioned, when we adopted our first, I don't know if it's our first, but one of our bike plans, we added 150 miles of bike lanes through road diets, and we doubled our bike trips from 3,000 to 6,000 daily trips. At that time, we generally selected roads with 10,000 ADT or less. We didn't notice any degradation in the auto level of service, and we did very minimal outreach with those projects. Now, I wouldn't recommend that today, but that's how we did it back then. But on these pretty low volume roads, 10,000 ADT or less, we actually don't do a lot of outreach with those because we know that the impact to the system is very small, if not even noticeable. When I'm going back to what I mentioned before with the multi-lane arterial design strategies and systemically evaluating the roadway capacity, converting our 4-lane roadways to 3-lane roadways. When we went through that process, we realized a significant crash reduction on those streets for all modes. We also noticed a significant decrease in speeding traffic. And at that time, we decided we were going to create a culture of right-sizing our roads on capital projects when possible. So here is a typical 4 to 3-lane road diet with the goals of reducing crashes, improving pedestrian safety, and maintaining traffic flow. And we converted to 1 lane in each direction and added bike lanes. We did some traffic signal modifications, all that good stuff. We saw almost a 50% crash reduction that still remains today, 8 years after we implemented this project. A big reduction in the 85th percentile speed and a bigger reduction in people driving over 35 miles an hour with very little change in travel times. It was just a slight increase for transit through this corridor and really nothing noticeable for auto traffic during the peak hours. When we're talking about our 5 to 3 lane conversions, because there's already a center turn lane in place on our 5-lane roadways, when we go to a 3-lane facility, we don't see a huge decrease in overall crashes or crash rates. What we do see is a big decrease in turning and angle crashes, which in turn results in a pretty significant reduction in fatal and serious injury crashes, 46% reduction. What we notice also is that bike volumes typically increase, and we see a decrease in bike crashes or bike crash rates, and pedestrian crashes decrease pretty significantly when we do this this type of treatment on 5 to 3 lanes. There's not a lot of data out there about these, and so we're trying to collect as much data we can at the City of Portland in these 5 to 3 lane conversions to show just really how helpful they are.
When you talk about those conversions, there's a slide before that talked about capacity. Do you compare vehicular capacity to kind of overall capacity for those conversions?
What we typically look at is we're less worried about how much delay. Well, let me back up. We are worried about delay for transit and for auto users, mostly for transit. If we think that there's going to be so much delay and cycle failure so that drivers aren't making it through a signal in one cycle or two cycles, and they'll divert to other streets, we'll look at doing, skinny, large nodes, skinny roads, right? So we'll open up more lanes at intersections to accommodate that. But typically our approach has been to model what we think the delay will be for users and share that in our public outreach and say, look, you're going to see 90 seconds of increase over this corridor, or 3 minutes of increase over this corridor. We get people used to that idea through our public outreach. We take feedback. Where can we make some improvements on some really sticky points? And then we worry less about how much the delay is once we've gone through the public process, and more about, are we hitting that 90 seconds or 3 minutes that we told you, right? And so we don't look at it as like, oh, 20% increase in travel time is too much. It's what is acceptable to the community through the public outreach that we've done. We had a project on a pretty significant corridor for Denver and Art, Southeast Foster Road. I know you know this one well. But when we started, we were like, well, there's going to be 3 minutes of delay on this corridor. We don't think we should do this. And what we heard from the community is, we're so ready for a change. We're so ready for better pedestrian facilities and the addition of bike facilities, that we're going to support the 3 minute delay. And so that's what the story became. And that's what the acceptance of the project became. And that's how we moved through that project. Lo and behold, when it was done, we did get some, complaints, as we always do, that these things seemed really slow. And when we looked, it was like 3 minutes of delay. So we hit our target. So we're more concerned about, what is the expectation, setting the expectation, and then hitting that target. And if we don't hit that target, then we continue to make tweaks to the system so that we do meet that target. I don't know if I totally answered your question, but again, we're less concerned about like the overseer level of service, and more about setting the expectation for what the project will produce.
No, that's really great information. The question was really about, do you sort of substitute ped and bike and transit capacity for roadway capacity when you talk about these projects in terms of capacity, or do you not really use capacity as one of your measures?
We report out on auto capacity, but we haven't really done a multimodal level of service analysis on these. I mean, we talk about each one in general, about what we expect for bike and ped usage and increase. And most recently, we've been focusing a lot on transit, right? Like, we don't want to degrade transit time. It's okay to degrade auto capacity, but transit is the one that we're really sticking to. And we'll add transit lanes if needed through intersections.
That was actually where I was going to jump in, Wendy. I feel like the place where we've been most successful with that is around transit. So we went through a series of processes looking at transit delay and getting council's acceptance and direction that transit delay was a problem as congestion was increasing, and then brought back the implementation of that to and those are hard moves that we've been making, but we have been using the number of people delayed essentially as looking at the inefficiency of having a bus full of people stuck behind 10 cars, and that there's 50 people on that bus. And that's really, really resonated with council and with the public about sort of who needs priority here.
Yeah. And who are we serving, right? It goes back to the equity question of, who are we serving? Are we serving the folks that have lots of options, transportation options, or are we serving the folks that have few transportation options? That sticks in my head for one of our most recent road diets that we did in the city of Portland. This is my last slide. It just kind of summarizes some of the things I was just talking about travel time increase and the changes matching the project modeling, and little change in transit times. And then to get to one of the questions that was asked just before I started this was, what are we hearing, or maybe not what we're hearing, but our pedestrian environments better and more preferred. And what we are hearing from businesses on the few that we pulled after we've done these projects is that they have strong support because what they see is a safer pedestrian environment. They're reporting more pedestrian activity and they're reporting less congestion on their facility. And just the businesses are quite happy with many of these projects that we've done. So I don't know if that touches the iceberg on the question that was asked about that or not, but
Wendy, I think it does. And I just want to follow up with that. So I think you mentioned the wide node, narrow road, and what I'm gathering is, you still have a wide node, but now it's wide because it has more pedestrian and bicycle facilities, fewer road lanes. Where you do have a larger arterial intersection, are you doing any specific treatments for those to help with ped and bike facilities or movements?
On our biggest facilities, we are trying to do separate bike signals and separate them from right turners. Again, we're also doing the transit priority, which would have a separate signal. So often bikes will go with transit priority. We're doing some left turn calming at some of our big intersections. So oftentimes when you have a giant intersection, people can cut the corner and take those turns pretty quick. And so we're putting in some delineator posts or some low profile speed bumps on the center line to slow folks down as they're turning. Because again, we see a pretty big number of left turn autos hitting pedestrians on our biggest facilities. So that's something that we've found pretty useful in the last couple of years. And then we're doing paint and post curb extensions to try to shorten the crossings where we can. That's difficult when we have right turn lanes or bus or transit only lanes, but doing it even on the side streets is helpful.
What's a sense of scale for your biggest facilities in intersections?
The biggest would be usually six lanes. So say like in the outbound direction, you might have a right turn lane or transit only lane, 2-3 lanes in a left turn pocket, and then 2 lanes in the opposite direction. That's becoming more rare. We're starting to take away the right turn lanes. We're only doing it where we really need the capacity to get folks through it. Some of our biggest.
So very, very few or no dual lefts.
Very few. We're trying to remove the ones that we do have. We keep a few in our industrial areas and kind of out near the airport in those areas, but downtown we've systemically removed those over the last year. I think we only have 1 or 2 left at some of our bridgeheads. So we're trying not to do that.
I'm going to have to run, but again, kind of a follow-up question would be, does your grid system help you eliminate those dual lefts where we're kind of challenged with that? So I'd like to learn more about that, and we'll follow up with you. But I have to run to 10 o'clock and get ready for that. I want to thank you all for your time and thank Adam for setting this up and inviting me. So enjoy the rest of your day, the rest of your week. Take care.
Thank you, David.
Thanks, David.
Great to meet you, David. Yeah, maybe I guess I'm happy to see this rather than a one-time waving at people from across the screen to the beginning of a dialogue. So I think that, as more questions come, if you send them, we can, forward them on to the staff that are responsible for those specific elements and, send information back. I think although I'm sure it's not always the case, it's fun to share what we do in Portland and share at least what we're aspiring to do. I mean, I think you get the somewhat glossy version of the struggle when we present it. It's really hard. There's really controversial backlash occurring with us that I know is happening with you as well. So it's not that it's just going swimmingly. We're definitely taking our lumps with even surprisingly small moves, like putting a diverter at a crossing along a neighborhood greenway, local street connection. 250 people backing me up onto a stage to scream at me a couple years ago. So it happens. It even happens in Portland, I guess, is the point. This is part of the process.
Yeah. And I do want to offer that I'm expected to be in Tucson toward the end of February. All things aligning. My in-laws live in Phoenix, but we're going to travel south. So happy to, if you think it would be helpful to meet up there, or again, just connect if I'm in the area. Happy to do that.
I just want to say I so appreciate your all willing to communicate with us and take the time, not only to, but Wendy, your comments about future communications. I just see so much value in these sorts of communications, and kind of new to the whole government scene myself, only being in office for 3 years, but I just see a lot of value in learning from each other and having those open lines of communication and getting that glossy overview. It's inspiring. It's definitely motivating. I'm hoping that our team, Jeff and Rick and Martin, you're learning something from this and that there's value to you too. But I just so appreciate it.
Yeah, I think the technical details and some of the examples that you've given are really, really good, and I could spend all day asking questions about some of the details. But I think what Art led with, I think, is probably the most interesting thing of all, and that's the concept of change management, and how do we manage this with both our staff, with the public, and how we set expectations, and with policymakers, and how we kind of give them that. How we give them the
That's
tools
my cue.
to work through
That's
this.
my favorite side of my queue, project management, manage change, a #1 issue.
Yeah, because it just feels really, really incomplete to sort of throw this on policymakers and expect them to have 100 angry comments on Facebook daily about what we're doing, and not give them kind of the ability to respond to that in a meaningful way to move us forward.
Yeah, and in addition to change management, it's the setting the expectations. As the city traffic engineer, we will never make everybody happy, but if we set expectations, that really helps, and just state it right up front. This is what we can do. This is what our target is, and then let them know that we met the expectations. So.
Wendy, quick question, when you talked about the right sizing of your roads, to me, that was incredible. If I think about doing that locally and what that would look like locally, I can imagine a large amount of additional congestion. I know you mentioned, I think 10,000 trips or less is what you're looking for in those opportunities. And Jeff, I'm curious to hear if you have any insights or thoughts on this, but I wonder if Flagstaff is in a different situation where we're not really able to take lanes. Maybe, what comes to my mind, team that are local, is 4th Street might be a good candidate, where we have a lot of lanes and maybe not as many, trips being made. But I love the idea of right sizing, and I just see it to be this huge of a untouchable conversation locally because of the struggles with that. Because it seems like we're just trying to do everything we can to build more capacity for cars.
Right. Adam, I think one key part, just one thought on that, and happy to follow up more, our Central City in Motion plan might be worth looking at, because we were sort of catch as catch can changing roads downtown, and our downtown business community said, hold up, where does this end? Which streets are you doing and which ones aren't you doing? And so we had to back up and do a 2-year public process that picked the streets that we think are the most viable. And we're now in design and in construction of those key bike corridors going through downtown, where previously we couldn't touch any of the major streets because they didn't believe that was going to be the last one.
Yeah.
So it's really worth being clear and saying, okay, we're going to leave these other ones alone. These are going to be the priority for motor vehicle movement. This is the one for transit movement. This is the one for bike and ped, and make those choices and document them.
Yeah, we did that in East Portland too, and we looked at all these roads because we got the same comments from folks. But in reality, what we see at the city of Portland is what a 4-lane roadway can carry, usually almost up to 20,000 ADT, can also be accommodated in 3 lanes without any impact to side streets or diversion or change in level of service. So I have a lot of experience in that area and can talk about road diets forever if you want to follow up on just the right sizing and the road diets. Because there's a lot of tricks that you can do and make those changes with very little notice to the rest of the surrounding system, up to certain traffic volumes. So,
Wendy, I'll go ahead and say that.
I probably want to reach out to you because Flagstaff is unique, and I know you probably expected this, Adam, but Flagstaff's unique. I mean, we're talking about 30,000 ADT on one road and there are no other roads. It's the only road. And it's the only road for bikes and peds and cars and transit. It's the only road. That's our battle right now.
Yeah, we have a couple of those, and we have some access management that we're focusing on those streets that also has pedestrian improvement. So again, yeah, happy to continue the conversation. I know we probably all have other meetings to jump off to.
Yeah, I do too. I've got a ton.
Yeah, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to meet with you all again, or try to hook up when I'm in Tucson.
Let's do that, Wendy. Jeff, did you have anything that you want to add really quick? I see you unmuted.
It was just a detail a couple of minutes ago. We don't have any 4-lane roads left. We've already road dieted all of them.
Oh, good.
Great.
And Art, I want you to know I've read the CCIM, all 73 pages.
Right.
I love that document. It's been and our team has looked it over as well.
Right.
I've made sure
Okay.
that our team has had access to it. So thank you for your work. And I've actually am in conversation Jacobs right now to see if any kind of smaller attempt or consultation is possible. Maybe not the full 2-year public engagement process, but like without getting into all the details, I know we're out of time, but yeah, that's a great document and a great effort.
Great.
Well,
Really appreciate your time.
in wrapping up, yeah, thank you all so much. We really appreciate it. This was a very good conversation. Wendy, let's definitely connect when you're in the state. And Art, I really appreciate the open line of communication, and maybe we can set up a follow-up in a couple months or something like that. We'll talk as an internal team and see what is best for us and how you all can, help us.
Yeah, I think particularly if there's specific sub areas, because rather than having one person doing it all, we have staff focused on these different spaces. It allows us to push this down into the staff level. So you don't need us, we're not necessarily the right people to be or to go deep with you. Wendy's got people on her team, for instance, that would be great to go deeper with you on some of the specifics of the design solutions and the like. So.
Well, thank you all. Have a great day. Happy New Year's, Denver, Wendy, and Art. Thank you. And yeah, really appreciate your work.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Appreciate your
Nice to
time.
meet you all.
Well,
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.